The themes that'll show up today is the whole idea of invasive species management and how we have dealt with invasive species. So this area, as with all of California, has been pretty heavily occupied by native peoples for well over 10,000 years. This site isn't a particular hot spot per se, because there just wasn't a huge amount of water. There is a creek over here called Strawberry Creek that goes behind us and goes down over there. So there's a little bit of water, but not compared to other, it's not a particularly super gigantic wet area. And so the modern management of this begins with the establishment of the Rancho period, the Spanish and the Mexican influence. And then eventually, as with much of California, things are carved up into ranchos. Relatively mellow manipulation around here, and then as those ranchos in turn get carved up in the wake of Mexican independence, then as there starts to be somewhat smaller parcels, and that continues on through the 1800s. So the story we haven't talked about in this class, but I'll just tell briefly, is the story of grasslands. So grasslands are iconic to California. They're incredibly important. You know nothing of what the grasslands used to be like. Massive difference. So we look at oak woodlands and we can kind of say, oh, that oak tree. Okay, yeah, that's a California native oak, yeah. Almost all of our grasslands are a completely different beast, and we'll never ever be able to go back to what they used to be. That's for a couple reasons. One, because of accidental things, and two, because of intentional things. The accidental things were few European settlers in California, and then San Francisco 49ers. Remember San Francisco 49ers? So in the year before, 1848, that's when we discover gold in Sutter's Mill, and it starts this insane, as we've talked about in the imaginary, this insane rush. Everybody's coming here. So all of a sudden the population just boom, explodes. All these people come from the East Coast. They don't know how to do anything. They're not necessarily outdoors people. They're not necessarily farm people. They're just gold in their eyes. Fever, right? Very similar to how some people are like, AI is going to save the world. AI is going to save the world. Sure, AI is going to be useful and impactful, but like some people are just like nuts, right? They suddenly get this thing on the brain. And so people run out here, they don't know what to do. So the people that mostly make money are the people that sell stuff to the miners. And one of the things they sell are gold pans and this. They also sell guns. And so these folks that are out in the Sierras, foothills, Sierras, all around, they don't know anything. I'm hungry. They don't have any food. So they start shooting stuff. So suddenly the deer populations, the grazer populations go down. Now, the other thing to say about grasslands is we look at this and we think of this as a classic California grassland landscape. Golden. We hear about the Golden State. A lot of people think the Golden State are our golden hills, and we do have very pretty hills, right? This is not what, so you hear the word grasslands and you think something like this. You think grass, right? Like on the ground, it's dead grass, and living grass. And we look at this and it's mostly non-bare ground. Our current understanding is that our historic grasslands, we maybe should call them forblands as opposed to grasslands. Grass and forbs are a management term. They're not a biological term. So this would be a grass, right? So grass, which is a grass, but basically includes the family of grasses, Poaceae, but also things that are grass-like, right? Stemmy, thinny, that kind of deal. Forbs would be interesting. I have to look around to find one, right? Because the forblands are no longer forblands. Okay, so an aster or a thistle or a daisy, this would be a forb. So when we look at a forb, it's a broad-leaved thing, right? The name really comes from grassland managers, ranchers. When they're on their horse and they're riding, they look down, they see this stuff looks kind of grassy, versus when they see stuff like this, they call a forb. So it's a morphological term, it's not a biological term, but it basically means broadleaf or grass-like. So we now think that our classic California grasslands were bare ground, some grasses, grass, maybe like you guys might be individual grasses, kind of where you're standing, and then in between some forbs. And so the beautiful diversity, if you look at any of the Bierstadts, any of the classic sort of Hudson River School, the people that came to California in the wake of the gold rush to paint Yosemite, all these beautiful landscapes. Look at the grasslands. There's never anything like this. It's all purples and oranges and reds and all these flowers. So those forbs are flowering. California native cool lupins and all kinds of stuff. And that was really what was here. Okay, so we're starving. We've shot all the deer. So now there's no more deer. Then we started shooting the rabbits. And we take all these the grazing populations on Tule elk. We had Tule elk all across the state. That eventually the lore is it crosses down to 2 individuals. Genetic work from Berkeley shows it was probably more like 6 to 12, but regardless, from hundreds of thousands of animals to a handful. And they're saved at Button Willow. So the next time you guys are taking the 5 and you're going to Sacramento or going down the grade, and you're coming from LA, go up the Grapevine, go down. There's a town called Button Willow, and there's the Tule Elk Preserve. Take 20 minutes and just go and park there. That was where a rancher who was a hunter and shot tons and tons of Tule elk finally said, I feel bad, there's no more Tule elk. And he grabbed the last few and put them on his ranch because he thought it's kind of lame that we drive the species to extinction. So Tule elk gone, deer gone, everybody gone. And now people are like, what are we gonna do? Let's make money on these folks, right? We're gonna start bringing in livestock from the East Coast to California, sheep, goats, cattle. And then we'll grow them up and then we'll sell burgers and steaks to the starving miners. So we bring that in. So 48 discovered gold. 49. So we discovered 48. The name really, the stuff really gets out in 49, and then people start coming 50, 51, 52. The fastest growth ever in our state's history, just insanely growing. And so these people start. So mid 1850s, start bringing these cattle out, put them out here. So the cattle start to graze. The cattle munch down all this vegetation down to nubs, right? And because they were using the style of grazing that people were doing in Kansas City and in Texas, which is not good for California, they overgraze. And they put too many animals per unit area, and they keep them too long on this landscape. And so they get munched down. So the plants are all stressed. Not all, but many of our native grasses were perennials. At least a much higher percentage we have now. So that would be a bunchgrass. Okay, talk more about pampas grass later. And so one of the ways they occupied space is just being big, just physically there. But now they've been munched down. All their stems have been munched. So now they're occupying just physically less space. Even if they're not dead, they're just occupying. So that their competition is being whack, 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 whack. Every time they start to grow up, whack, whack, whack. All the grazers grazing them. Then we hit the worst drought in California until a couple years ago. 1863, 1864 it starts, and it goes for many years, and everything is stressed. So now these guys are being massively grazed, and they're dying just because there's like an unprecedented lack of water. So now things are just disappearing from the landscape. So now the people doing livestock start losing their shirts because all the animals are dying, right? So they can't get enough food. So in fact, in a lot of cases, they just turn them loose. They don't even kill the cattle. They're just like, it's not even worth it. Not worth it for me to kill them. They're all scrawny and skinny and no meat. And so now we have massive overgrazing. Now we have these guys, not even just in the grazing areas, all over the landscape. Drought. And so then when we finally get out of that drought, some of the ranchers are like, well, I know my cattle from Europe, basically. I know they eat this. Let me bring this over. So then we start intentionally introducing seeds. Forage. Some cases for forage, some cases it's for stuff for when the cattle don't feel good or some other medicinal plant or whatever. So we start actively seeding landscapes. One of the last examples of that is what I'm standing on right here. So this is called harding grass, Phalaris aquatica. This is a better one. You can see it more clearly right here. So this is a perennial grass. This is a grass that has a defined area, right? It's not just like one little shoot, but it's a clump of shoots and they go up. Perennial means it lives from year to year to year to year. This is the classic seed heads. If you look at it, it feels kind of soft. Now this was from South America. And so who? University researchers. Where? UC Davis. Thank you. They're like, hey, we want to help ranchers. So maybe because there's not a whole lot of grass around here, maybe we should introduce some new grass. Maybe some grass that's green all year round. So they grab this stuff, which cattle hate to eat, which is not good for cattle to eat. It's sort of, the nutrition in there is nowhere near what other grasses, but they're like, perennial, green, let's get it. So he spread it all around and it's become a noxious weed. So this area was massively inoculated with this starting in the basically mid 1900s, early to mid 1900s. And as you see, here's one, 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 here's one. These guys have taken over, right? So these guys have outcompeted. And so we have, I'll tell you just 3 basic types and then we'll move on to something else. But 3 basic types of California native grasslands. And again, California is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, especially for things like plants. So we have about 5,000 species of just native plants in California. So we have, I'll tell you about 3 basic types of grasslands. One is the kind of, I mean, my grassland expert friends will tell me, there's like 20 kinds of grasslands, man, don't tell them that. Screw that. From a management perspective, there's basically 3 broad categories. One is the stuff you see by school. You see up in the hillsides, the classic, what looks green, brown in the summertime and greens up in the springtime. We call that, a grassland, a California native grassland. Another broad category, it's really important for management, are grasses that grow on what's called serpentine grass, or serpentine soils. And those are soils that have a lot of these special minerals and asbestos and various things that make it chemically hard. So it's not dry, but chemically it's very hard for plants to deal with these soils. So it's like they're in drought. They're stressed out all the time. So it's a really hard place to make a living. So California native plants have adapted to that, but it's very hard for invaders to get in there. So serpentine grasslands, regular grasslands. And the third type is where you're standing. This is coastal prairie. And so this is an area that tends to be much wetter. So as we know, you guys were, I said it was a little cold last night when we were going to bed. It had the fog that was sort of coming in, right? So this sort of coastal fringe, much wetter than sort of interior places, stays dry, stays wetter. So each of these three types of grasslands have characteristic species. So what we need in these grassland landscapes, as with many of our management challenges across the coastal zone, is we need appropriate levels of stuff. It's not like never have any grazers or have grazers there all the time. It's like we want to do it appropriately. And so a lot of these ranchers, especially here in the Central Coast, are awesome ranchers. They're very good stewards of the land. And so what the ultimate now is they come and they bring the cattle and they munch, but they don't leave them for months on end. And so every day or two, the rancher, and depending on some place, every few hours, depending on the site, they're going to come out and they're going to be walking around like, okay, so here's the biomass. The cattle have munched it down to here, and now I pull them off. I'm not going to let them eat down the bottom and rip out the roots and trample on everything. We're just going to take the top biomass. Similar to how when we went to the abalone farm, we just shim off the top of the kelp, right? We don't kill the kelp. We just take off the haircut, take that in, feed the urchins. And then, a few days or a week or two later, the canopies return, right? So appropriate level management.